There we go.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So
You're on.
I'm on. We've talked about this previously, that in Buddhism, we're not trying to get close to someone who's divine and will save us. We're just following someone else's example of living in the world, because those ways lead to a workable state of mind that allows us to live fully and awake. This workable state of mind relies on taming the mind. Trungpa Rinpoche describes taming as having a container for the wild contents, the discursive thoughts, the subconscious gossip, and the scheming for the future that are the normal inhabitants of our minds. The container encapsulates our wild thoughts as a glass contains sake. Then the mind's contents can become a workable part of the path. And the beginning of the workable state of mind is making yourself available to this process. Becoming available to a you, to an environment that supports this holding and doesn't feed the creation of more stories, more schemes, more ongoing, exciting narrative of our lives and times. We aren't trying to get rid of these stories, these thoughts, just holding, calming, taming them within our glass. With this holding or taming, there can now arise a sense of good or bad, a natural order rather than wildness or undisciplined chaos, a sense of conscientious attentiveness builds, in an ability to discriminate with precision and dignity, the way to be and to relate to the world. And this way of being in the world is what Rinpoche refers to as decorum. Conducting oneself with decorum means living with dignity and awareness, whatever you're doing. Choosing to do things simply and directly, having a sense of head and shoulders, being mindful and genuinely present in whatever you're doing, on or off the cushion. Then the mindfulness and the authenticity begin to transform you. And meditation practice brings together being with mind. So possessing this growing sense of conscientiousness and decorum, renunciation is the willingness to let go of what is sensed as unhelpful, unwholesome. Basically, what leads to static or dead ends. It's choosing to let go rather than follow our habitual reactive patterns. And following a practice of embracing helpful actions and restraining from unhelpful ones is developing discipline. Discipline has the flavor of cleaning up messes and restraining from creating new ones. This is in contrast to how we normally think of right or moral behavior. Trungpa says, quote, Buddhist ethics are not a matter of good and evil. They're more a matter of tidiness and sloppiness. The Buddhist approach is not necessarily to make the world a good world, but to make the world a decent world. If you are tidy, then you're not creating any chaos for others. Discipline's foundation is accommodating to things as they are rather than how we want them to be. Trungpa considers this fundamental sanity. Rather than rules or procedures, discipline develops more like an entity, something we can relate to within ourselves. There's a sense of something developing that resonates with how the world actually is. This realistic acceptance grows a pragmatic, precise state of mind and actions, gradually replacing mental confusion, letting go of complication as we practice the discipline of meditation. The essence of that discipline is the mind being in its right place, the place where it is now, this very moment. This has two components, a one-pointedness and discriminating awareness. One-pointedness is an integration of our minds with our felt experience. There's a tangible, embodied connection with ongoing continual awareness of felt experiencing of the present moment. Discriminating awareness is seeing that present moment as it is. Trungpa Rinpoche says, quote, "It's the intelligence that enables you to relate with the activities of life, the happening awareness of what is going on right now with no blind spots." We can also look at Hinayana discipline through the lens of aloneness and loneliness. Trungpa Rinpoche says, ultimately, there's just us alone. There are no others from whom we can get guaranteed companionship, guaranteed protection, guaranteed safe harbor. But our culture invites the fantasy of something else, a soulmate, or at least a married partnership that we can count on to fill our basic needs for love and comfort and security. However, the nature of reality is that even someone who's committed themselves to us, they can't see the world from out of our eyes. We are, in that sense, alone and separate. Ultimately, there is no one person we can take refuge in. We're it. And so Trungpa Rinpoche says we have to, quote, handle our lives properly. He describes 6 different ways of being alone. These are ways in which aloneness can manifest in our lives, sort of describing flavors of aloneness. The first, less desire, means you have a more neutral attitude toward what arises in your life. You're not grasping so hard for security, for permanence. The second, contentment, reflects an aloneness that's not looking to be different, to be more. It's an aloneness with a sense of settled. The third, avoiding unnecessary activities, is an aloneness that doesn't have to be entertained. It isn't attempting to fill time to avoid or distract from being alone. The fourth morality is aloneness with dignity and decorum, the rightness that keeps getting refreshed from our meditation practice. The fifth, not wandering in the world of desire, means you are alone and are not shopping around for someone who will change that, not searching for someone to fill you up, to fill space. And finally, the sixth flavor of aloneness is a working with discursive thoughts, with simplicity and directness, a moving away from rather than following our thoughts for entertainment, a less scattered and distracted mind, letting thoughts settle and be tamed. As we come into the world alone and go at it the same way, aloneness is a basic fact of the human condition. Not being able to tolerate being alone means not being able to tolerate things as they actually are. Others provide us with company, with assistance. None of it is permanent. Even a dependent, helpless little baby experiences gaps in their parents' attending and must learn to self-soothe. We could stand in our loneliness. Let the basic fact of it settle into our bodies. Investigate how aloneness lives in our bodies. Does it have a texture, a temperature, a shape? How is it in this present moment? So we've been exploring aloneness. The you who is lonely is ego. Loneliness is a hankering for the other. This requires a dualistic perspective of I and other. There's a feeling of not being enough on your own. We are wandering in the world, looking for something outside of ourselves to fill that emptiness, to combat that basic feeling of loneliness. We might look to spirituality, to friends, community, even creative endeavors for that sense of completeness, attempting to bypass our loneliness. But what the ego sees as a problem that must be fixed, a sense of deprivation, separateness, of being lost that must be overcome, there's a doorway into experiencing egolessness. Loneliness, lost without other, points to egolessness. However, what's really missing is not the other, but the you that you think you are. When we start to notice feelings of loneliness, we often try to make it tolerable by replacing it or mixing it with some source of entertainment. However, looking to escape loneliness by seeking to be entertained leads to a sense of hollow and fruitlessness. Nothing really gets entertained, but expectations are raised, then dashed, and then a sense of hopelessness, no way out comes. Attempting to move away from the full experience of our loneliness leads to this dead end. However, leaning into the loneliness, letting ourselves have that very definite experience from a curious, warm, kind place, that gives us a workable path. A sense of aloneness might be accompanied by a feeling of spaciousness, an awareness that's an expansive view of yourself and the world. Loneliness might feel like deprivation or contraction with a more narrow awareness of what's not there. A craving for things to be different than they are. Trungpa Rinpoche says, quote, "It's absolutely necessary to relate to aloneness and loneliness because for a long time we've ignored them. But Hinayana discipline is the discipline of loneliness and aloneness." To experience aloneness, you don't need to be physically alone. You don't have to be in any specific external situation, like being by yourself on a mountaintop or in solitary retreat. Whatever circumstances you're in doesn't change the essence of alone. Trungpa says, a lion in the zoo is still a lion. Renunciation of romantic relationships doesn't bring you the experience of loneliness. It comes on its own. Trungpa says there's no need to seek it. You don't choose loneliness. It chooses you. It is direct experience. And for that reason, it's much more fruitful for working the path. It isn't a concept that we choose to believe in or not. And it doesn't have any flavor of a self-improvement project. Experiencing aloneness in your meditation practice, in relationships, in work life, gives rise to more mindfulness and awareness because you can begin to feel the quality of aloneness that's not dependent on who you're with or what you're doing. That is no reference point. You're alone, and you begin to experience no need for things to be any different from this. You're beginning to understand that there's nothing to do here, nothing to control. What Trungpa Rinpoche refers to as, quote, seeing the helplessness of one's own experience. And that is the only useful view. Not only are we helpless to control and dictate our experiences, but we're basically alone and no one else is going to come along and fix everything for us either. This view is fundamental to the philosophy of our lineage. Besides giving up the hope for a savior, we're giving up the need for companionship. And we make a friend of our loneliness instead. What does that mean, to make a friend of loneliness? It means becoming intimate with the very real feeling of being lonely. Our embodied experience of that, the qualities of it, what comes directly within ourselves. What's registering in our body when we feel the pain of being overlooked, excluded, not seen, not understood, or the feeling that we just don't belong? We don't wish our friend loneliness to go away, but we welcome them with curiosity. Trungpa Rinpoche says, quote, you don't have to seek out loneliness. It's always there. A feeling of loneliness is part of the journey. In that journey, we lose our sense of ourselves as the hero or narrator of our story. Instead of becoming lost in the story we're telling ourselves about our lives, we're letting go, opening up, and just noticing what comes with the present moment. We're listening to ourselves. And then, as Rinpoche puts it, quote, you begin to make discoveries. You discover devotion, and you discover a quality of richness and artistic expression that is very special. Being you, but not being you, is very resourceful. You become a complete mountain man. You know how to make fire and cook food, but it doesn't mean anything. You're still nobody. That is the inspiration. So we're living in a time that heightens the paradox of our walking the Buddhist path alone, together, as John put it last week. Just as all humanity is facing a common threat at the same time, we need to be more separate and alone to curb the spread of the COVID virus. To survive, we have to collectively be more separate, more alone. Communities that can't do this, with higher population density, multiple family homes, more jobs that can't be done remotely, are now suffering higher infections and more deaths. These times highlight the social nature of our species and the basic fact of our aloneness. Now of all times, we aren't able to ignore aloneness and loneliness. Our practice is to allow the loneliness and the disruption of our habitual attempts to escape it to become an opportunity. To handle our lives properly, we choose to let go of our fixation, let go the attractiveness of our habitual reactive patterns. We turn toward the direct experience of aloneness and loneliness with curiosity, with warmth. We touch in and investigate. This is our discipline. We have 2 more chapters to cover tonight, so I guess we'll hold discussion till the end. But then I'll be curious to hear, if you like, what you're experiencing of aloneness and loneliness is, what its qualities are, how it's embodied in you. Trungpa Rinpoche said, you do not have to seek out loneliness, it's always there. Does that seem true for you in your experience? Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. Well, these chapters have a really common theme, which is mindfulness meditation. And the basic notion is that until we begin to shift our loyalty to mindfulness, we are constantly embroiled in a succession of thoughts which are lit with anxiety, self-concern, concern about that's what ego is, and are about the past and the future. And they are like an ongoing drama that we're caught up in, or dramas, plural. And what mindfulness meditation is the process or the act of identifying that, seeing those thoughts, and coming back to the present, which is here, now, clear, awake, always here, until we have thoughts about it, and then we get lost in those dreams. This is the main theme of all these chapters. The constant attempt to find company is the attempt to keep those dreams going. That's what company is for. Company out there is like part of the conversation. We can have a conversation that's always pleasure and pain oriented. And not only that, but when we have the conversation with that other person, that savior from our loneliness, it proves that I'm here, me, ego, alive and well, because I'm here responding. And the problem with loneliness and aloneness is that when we let go of the other, then there's no confirmation of me. And in fact, that whole game of back and forth, I, other, that's there, therefore I am here, evaporates, which is what the practice of mindfulness meditation is. We let that evaporate, we come back into this present moment. Now in the chapter 17, he starts out with the chapter is called Taming the Neurotic Mind. And he says that the Hinayana, the first stage of the path, begins with taming the mind, which is straightforward. It means relating to things as they are, instead of as we think them to be. As they are, it's right here, present, in the present moment. This is it. It's completely obvious and apparent. But then we might say, well, I don't know about that. I'm going to think about this. And, and then we get lost in thoughts again. So in sitting practice, we start with very simple setup, and we're working with our body, our awareness of our body, our breath, if we're working with the breath, and our mind. Now, mind has two meanings. There's sort of awakened or healthy mind, and there is neurotic mind. And these two are distinguished in the Tibetan teachings. He doesn't go into this here, but I'm going to help you with this a little bit. The neurotic mind, which he's talking about here, is the thinking mind. For those of you who read Suzuki Roshi's Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, it's the distinction in the Zen tradition between big mind, which is the mind of the present moment. It's the mind that sees all of this that we're in the middle of right now. And little mind. Little mind is thinking, well, what am I going to do tomorrow? Or what's for dinner? Or I'm lonely, or it's having all these thoughts. And that distinction between what you might call big mind in the Zen tradition, what he is referring to as awareness and lots of other things here, and neurotic mind or little mind is key to this whole discussion. When we practice Shamatha meditation, we are again and again identifying the products of little mind, which are thoughts and emotions, I, other situations, letting them go because they are just momentary dreams. And as soon as you're aware that you're dreaming, you are freed from it for however long. It might just be a split second, might be a while. The dreams self-liberate. They end. It's just like in the morning when you wake up and you realize that you've been dreaming. Well, you're not anymore. Same thing in meditation. You realize, oh, I've been dreaming. I've been having this thought about my mother or about lunch or about the pain in my leg, whatever it might be. And you're back. You're back in this open awareness, which is the mindfulness. This is mindfulness practice. Seeing the dreams and coming back from them. And this is what is meant by taming the mind in the Hinayana stage of the path. He goes on, he says, ordinary neurotic mind consists, this is the thinking mind, consists of 4 basic obstacles. I like this. Stupidity. There's nothing good here. Mindlessness, emotional upheavals, and lack of faith. I mean, we could probably come up with some other terrible things. So stupidity is the state of mind that is uninformed. It's not educated. It's not inquisitive. You see, if we come back into the present moment, well, there's a lot to be inquisitive about. We might wonder, well, is the sun about to come up, and all kinds of things. I want to explore our world, see how things work, appreciate it. But in stupidity, there's no inquisitiveness. Actually, in the Vajrayana, inquisitiveness becomes a very important virtue. And it becomes the new meaning of the word prajna. But we're not going to get into that too much. It just means that curiosity about the world is huge. It's a virtue because one falls in love with this world as it's arising now. It needs openness and willingness to look into situations and understand them. The obstacle of stupidity means that you have not been inquisitive enough to learn. Mindlessness, second of these four obstacles, it's the absence of awareness. It just means being lost in thought. You're unaware. You're unaware of yourself. You're unaware of your environment. We could walk down the street. I always say this, looking for Starbucks. You could be looking for something else. And you're so lost in thought, worrying about the rent, your lover, whatever it might be, the person who insulted you, that you walk right by. It's mindless. Awareness is a natural instinct. Eventually we come back. A horn goes off and wakes us from our dream. And we realize we just walked by that Starbucks a few minutes ago. But awareness is subverted by irritation. Irritation is the product, these thoughts that we have about the past and the future, they just fill us with irritation about the way things are, about what we think. And he says, and with irritation, we go lower than animals. Animals are actually pretty curious and inquisitive, naturally. Then the third is emotional upheavals. The Sanskrit for this is klesha. And there are, depending on the system, 5 or 6 main kleshas. Let's see, what are they? Anger, greed, lust, jealousy, pride. That's the fivefold version. Sixfold version includes a feeling of poverty, hunger, that you're inadequate, your life is not enough. These are the main kleshas. And then there are the 3 poisons, which are even more fundamental. They are aggression, passion, and what's usually translated as ignorance, and Rinpoche uses that term, but it's actually better translated as indifference, stupidity. And everybody has a dominant klesha or 2 that defines sort of our neurotic character. It's the way we behave neurotically when we're feeling, especially if you might notice it when you're feeling threatened or poverty-stricken. And it comes from wanting to stick to your own identity and to your own importance. That's what the kleshas are all about, me. He says here, and this is important, the point is not necessarily to control your emotions, your kleshas, or try to be good. At the same time, there's the possibility that you could be watchful of yourself and your state of mind. And this really is the instruction throughout, and we're going to come back to this, that you're not trying to purify yourself, which is another form of egotism. Really what we're doing is we're developing compassion for ourselves. Compassion not in the sense of feeling sorry for, but compassion in the sense of being willing to see it, being willing to see it and work with it, or let it go. Because until we're willing to see it, we're lost in it. We're living in the dream. And as soon as we wake up, we say, oh yeah, I was having this dream of jealousy. Well, you're not anymore. You can go back to it, but for a moment at least you've woken up. And the fourth problem of mindlessness or ego is lack of faith. It's not having enough faith in yourself, not having the faith that you can actually tread this path. You feel that you're dumb, that there's no point in trying to understand the teachings, and that when you meditate, you're just not going to be able to do it because you're constantly going off into a dream. And so you beat yourself up for that. Faith needs a kind of surrendering to oneself. It means that when you sit and you realize that you are dreaming, you're not going to go off into the dream of self-hatred for that, of self-criticism. That's another dream. You're going to let it go with kindness. And then faith is knowing as well that this is the right path, that this actually makes sense and works for you, that when you practice the meditation of mindfulness and you come back from these anxious, fearful, hopeful dreams into awareness in the present moment, you're coming back into sanity. And that makes complete sense, and it's something that you want to commit to. Now, the role of meditation is to relate with these four mental obstacles. And in order to do that, you need to be trained in shamatha, the development of peace. That's what shamatha means. And in shamatha, you witness all of your own neurosis, your stupidity, your unawareness, your emotional upheavals, your faithlessness. And by witnessing them and not going off or going off less into reactivity, you're beginning to tame the mind. This is planting a seed. You're not trying to become a great meditator, sitting for an hour without thoughts. That's not the point. Taming the mind means that some kind of friendship is taking place between those four obstacles and you. That's so key, that we begin to develop some kind of feeling of kindness for ourselves and friendship with the obstacles. That doesn't mean we're going to keep doing them, liking them. It just means that we're not hating ourselves for having them. We're kind. We're developing maitri for ourselves, compassion. And he says a basic point of the Hinayana training is the conviction that you can practice along with your problems, that you can sit there and let they will arise and pass. This is really what's meant by the discipline, by the way. The discipline is coming back to awareness out of dream. And the way we do that is in sitting meditation. You can do it in walking meditation. You can do it as you walk down the street too. But sitting meditation is the fail-safe. It's the acid test. It's really, all the other ways, it's easy to fool yourself. You can go off into a dream or a daydream of some kind. But when you sit and you encounter that boredom, that repetitive state of mind, that's the fail-safe. The process of meditation, he says, brings out the details of these four mental obstacles: lack of faith, emotional upheavals, mindlessness, and stupidity. And it also brings out awareness. And we begin to see it in glimpses and more. What awareness of the present moment actually brings to us. This last chapter is even more powerful and in driving this point home. And he's talking about how the Buddhist path is all about cutting karma. What is karma? Karma are the dreams that we have stored in our memories. They come from past experience. And they are habitual and repetitive, these dreams. And when we get involved in them, we are trapped in the dream, trapped in worrying about it, and it can actually impel us into action. There are people who are so animated by their dreams that they can't meditate. There's a practice that haven't been doing in recent years much, that Trungpa Rinpoche instituted, called Datun. And we've done weekends in our Westchester Buddhist Center before COVID happened, where we go off for a period of time, a week. A Datun is a month. And you can go for the whole month. People sometimes sign up for a week or 2 or 3 of it. Sometimes there are people who do the whole month. Always, there's at least one person, maybe out of 20, 60, who can't sit the Datun because their mind is so engaged in the dreams. The dreams pick them up right off the cushion and walk them out the door. But this happens to all of us in greater or lesser degrees as we go off into our dreams, as we live our lives according to these dreams. And this is what it means to be bound by the chain of karma. This is our karma. Your karma, my karma, is the peculiarity of our particular dreams. We've accumulated these from childhood, and if you believe in past lives, even before. You had an angry mother, and now when you see women who remind you of your angry mother, you react negatively. You have fear, or you have some sort of reaction. It could be anything. You had a traumatic incident as a child. It was stored in your memory. You're not thinking about it now, but when something arises in the present moment that reminds you of that, you're triggered. And that whole memory of the traumatic incident re-arises, and you have a reactivity. This is karma. Karma are the dreams that fill our mind, the thoughts, and that bind us and limit us and shape us in very peculiar and neurotic ways. So the Buddhist path is all about cutting karma. How do we do that? It's really obvious and simple. We do it by coming back from dream into this awareness here, the present moment. We can use the breath to do that because the breath always takes place in the present. Every time we lose track of the breath, it means we're off somewhere else, having a conversation with our aunt in Poughkeepsie or our friend in Tallahassee. And then we realize, oh, I'm dreaming, and I come back. And when you do that, when you come back, you're cutting that dream. And that's the karmic chain that you've just cut. And he's saying here, the Buddhist path is all about cutting karma, the dreams we live out, coming back to clear, empty awareness, mindfulness, which is the discipline, and it's the renunciation. This is the real meaning of renunciation. Renunciation doesn't mean wearing a hair shirt, like you're going to get some benefit out of that, or eating terrible, simple food or whatever, giving up smoking or who knows what it was. Renunciation means letting go of the dreams and coming back to this present moment. That's the real meaning of it. And this is discipline, sultram. And that the more you begin to realize this logic, the more you make a commitment to this for the rest of your life. That doesn't mean you can do it perfectly at all. We're constantly, habitually going off into dreams, but little by little, the seed, the loyalty to mindfulness is growing within us. So this is Sosotarpa. Sosotarpa, he is the Tibetan for individual liberation, individual salvation. And this is what it is. It's the salvation. It's the freedom from the tyranny of our own thoughts, our own dreams. And it produces the virtue of not harming oneself or others, because that's what dreams are all about, harming oneself and others. The two go together. And it's planting mindfulness in your basic consciousness, and it becomes a natural part of you. Here he says, he starts talking about the Alia. You're planting, see, the Alia is where all of these habitual patterns are stored. Freud called it the unconscious. In Buddhism, way before Freud, they called it the storehouse consciousness. That's what Alia means. Alia Vijnana, Sanskrit. The Alia means storehouse, Vijnana means consciousness. It's not a separate thing. It's just an aspect of ego. And what it means is that you've had this incident, traumatic, beneficent, who knows what, and you're not thinking about it now, but it's stored back there in potential. It can come to life. That's the Alia. It stores that. It's the storehouse for all of those habitual patterns, memories. And you can store in the Alia a growing tendency to come back into the present. That's mindfulness. Mindfulness is a seed that you can plant in the Alia. And the more it grows there, the more you switch your loyalty from the dreams to mindfulness. He says, when you begin to practice, you need to have some understanding of the logic of the path. This is often called the view. And it's true. I mean, it convinces us to actually do this crazy thing of sitting down on a cushion or in our chair for an hour and watching our breath, watching our dreams, sitting with that, because we begin to understand that this is the road to sanity, and that not taking this road condemns us to insanity. He says this counters samsara, which creates a mile out of an inch. I love that. You know, somebody says something mean to you, and all of a sudden, you know, it just goes ricochets and reverbs, and what was maybe one little remark becomes a huge resentment. We create a mile out of an inch. It's a funny one. It says it's like an echo chamber going on and on, this expansion of what is minute. And then another problem with samsara is that we constantly see our experience through the filter of our past karma. Just like that whole incident of having an angry mother or an angry father or an angry somebody in your life. And now when you see people who remind you of that person, you immediately have a reaction for however long. And you don't see that person as they truly are. You see them through the veil of that past memory. That's a problem. And again, the cure for that is mindfulness practice, to come back again and again. And here's the other thing that he mentioned in this last chapter, that you don't treat the dream that you're coming back from as an enemy. You give it kindness. And when you do that, you allow it to go away by itself. If you treat it as an enemy, you make it into something much more real than it really is. You reify it. So this whole thing of kindness for ourselves is so important in meditation. We're developing two things. We're cutting through the false veils that misinterpret our experience, and we're developing compassion for ourselves and others, which is the ability to let it be. Their neurosis, our neurosis, all of it. Yeah. He says, I'm just quoting him, the only way to prevent this whole involvement in samsara, is to cut the karma through mindfulness practice. Because you are being mindful, you do not follow desires when they come up. Each time there is a desire, you are mindful of it, or an aggression, but you don't follow it. In that way, you cut the minute desires and aggressions. Cutting an inch of small desires produces a mile, is like cutting a mile of larger desires. I think I got that wrong. So we begin by planting seeds of mindfulness in the Alia. We do this by sitting in our intention. He says what we are trying to do in Shamatha practice is to tackle that level of Alia consciousness. We are trying to plant a seed of mindfulness awareness, a less habitual, less animal-like instinct in the Alia consciousness, not proceeding out of ego, but with greater sanity. And then he talks about a very interesting one, gaps. He says, mindfulness is not based on looking for danger or saying, be careful. That's the usual idea of being mindful. Be mindful when you cross the street. Be mindful when you light the stove. You know, it's not that. With mindfulness, there is the quality of openness or gap. He says, like the minute you wake up in the morning, there's a gap. What's happening? Or when you have to struggle to swallow a big piece of meat, you might have a gap. Or when you have a gigantic sneeze, there are always occasions when a gap occurs in your mind. And actually, I think there are 5 main instances, which include, among other things, of this gap, which can happen naturally. One is that, like the idea of you're swallowing a big piece of meat, something unexpected and maybe unwanted is happening to you. Like you're about to step off the curb and a car is rushing by and it scares the hell out of you, and it creates a gap, a moment of jolt. You come out of your thoughts. Another one is the moment of orgasm. They say that creates a gap. Another one is the moment of death. There's supposed to be a big gap when that happens. And there's tremendous opportunity in all these gaps. And he talks about a sneeze. That's the 4th one. These are the traditional sort of 4 moments of gap: sneeze, orgasm, death, jolt, and I'm trying to remember the 5th. He says waking up in the morning. Maybe that's it. But there are others. The mind just gaps naturally. When you're sitting, suddenly there's an opening and you're awake. Come back from your dream. He says gaps are opportunities for you to plant something positive in your mind. You can plant shamatha in the mind in the form of mindfulness awareness. Also, what he doesn't go into here is that when there is a gap, you can look back and you can say, oh yes, I was dreaming. And in that moment, that dream loses a little of its potency, a little of its power to grip you. Every time you see one of the dreams as they arise in your mind, without reactivity, without saying, oh, that was terrible, I had a dream again, I'm just a lousy meditator. You do that, it's worthless. But if you can just see it with kindness and watch it disappear for however long, it might just be an instant, that, they say, burns it up a little bit. And every time you do that, with that compassion, it burns it up a little more. And the habitual tendency is moving away, dissolving, and giving you more room for mindfulness. The interesting thing about mindfulness, and I don't know if he said it in this chapter, is that we think we have to do it. And we do. You sit down on the cushion, you practice it. But the main thing is that it grows by itself. It's like, in spite of us, we say, I'm a terrible meditator, and it's going to take me decades to get this if I ever do. And meanwhile, the mindfulness just grows by itself. It's like a seed that gets planted. And slowly, slowly, it begins to take us over. He says, if you sneeze, try to be awake after you sneeze. Don't just grab a tissue right away. Let your nose run, but allow yourself a little gap, a little space, which has a kind of spark and delight in it. It is the starting point of mindfulness. And this spark, this delight, this quality of appreciation of this world as it's arising in this gap, vividly, spontaneously. That's a big term, spontaneity. All of this stuff is happening spontaneously. He says, if you don't need to work hard to feel more than you usually feel, to feel more mindful. It is somewhat joyful. You realize that you could be so uplifted by being mindful. You begin to feel very good that you could rise beyond your regular, ordinary struggles, which don't require awareness, but give you tremendous pain, misery, and mindlessness. Your ordinary struggles, worrying about the rent and feeling, oh God, my love life is terrible, or whatever it might be. I'm too fat, and who knows what it is. I'm getting old. My body's falling apart. I'm going to die. That's a good one, especially for a lot of the people here. When renunciation is planted as a habitual pattern in your Alia consciousness, as part of the fundamental mindfulness process, your experience becomes fundamentally good. Fundamentally good. It's not good as opposed to bad. It really means kind of that your experience in mindfulness is worth being here for. It's rich, it's vivid, it's alive, it's full of curiosity and interest. It's beautiful. It has a beauty of its own. Even when it's ugly, it's still beautiful. So he says we don't have to spend money or effort to experience the joy of being alive as human beings. The way to appreciate life is to be mindful. Doesn't it sound so obvious? The way to appreciate our lives is to be mindful, not lost in dreams, coming back. Otherwise, you cannot really appreciate your life. With no mindfulness, you have missed lots of things already, and you will miss a lot more. And he says, this is a good one. You are like somebody who has been running a projector in a movie theater for 60 years and has never actually seen or watched a movie. You keep on running the projector quite beautifully, but you get tired of yourself. It's so important to have mindfulness awareness. If you do, your style of enjoyment will be different. So one needs to start by cleaning up after yourself, learning how to be good to yourself by developing maitri or loving kindness. And we're getting to the end here. He says, you might think that your mindfulness practice is not working, that you are still the same cranky person. But that doesn't really matter. As long as you continue to cut the karmic roots, that's the habitual patterns, by coming back through sitting practice. As long as you continue to do that, you can cut a lot of roots in an hour of meditation. And after years of practice, eventually you no longer have a samsaric occupation to uphold. Once you have cut the karmic roots completely, to the extent that there are no roots left, you begin to cut karmic debts as well. Therefore, sitting practice is regarded as very precious and important. So this whole thing, all these 3 chapters are really about coming back, mindfulness, which is coming back from dreams into awareness of the present moment. We haven't even gotten to awareness meditation. We're just talking about the mindfulness, which is so important. We are shifting our loyalty from confusion, samsara, selfishness, to openness and sanity and appreciation of this life. And we do it through the practice of mindfulness meditation. We sit, the breath comes up, we watch it go out, it dissolves, and here we are. So we could have a discussion with Laura and me. And if you raise your hand, Barry, Laura, and I will find you.
I think Kim.
That's Randy.
Oh, that's Randy. Hi, Randy.
With Kim. Hi, Kim.
You got to unmute yourself.
Get on it. There we go. So I have a question about aloneness and egolessness. It sounds like if aloneness is always present, that would mean that it's not contingent upon the ego. And if that's the case, then it sounds like ego. Well, so if you attain egolessness, then aloneness doesn't self-liberate. They exist simultaneously, but they're not the same thing. Is that right?
He doesn't exactly say this, but I see aloneness as an absolute view. And loneliness is from a relative view or a dualistic view. And he says loneliness is always there. And I was just wondering, I've run this by, some people go, yes, it's always there. But that's not my experience. So I was just, in that sense, aloneness is more like, to me, it feels more like wholeness.
Well, so I guess I want to know is aloneness is never something we're going to get rid of. It's just always there, but it's not contingent upon the ego.
That I would agree. Yeah, that it's a fact of human condition. It's part of being human.
Mm-hmm.
But
so if we were ever in a state of egolessness, aloneness would also be present, as it were. It's not like egolessness is then suddenly going to dissipate aloneness. You won't be able to get rid of it.
I'd like to hear what John says about this, but for me, it feels like an aspect of egolessness, like a quality of it.
Just the quality of.
I think so too. And loneliness, on the other hand, is the complaint of ego.
Yeah, that they have to go hand in hand.
Yeah, that it feels unhappy, wants a partner to prove that it's alive and well. That's loneliness. But aloneness is one of the descriptors, I think, for reality.
Mm-hmm.
Just another way of coming at it. And he's saying we are alone. There is no I or other. So in a way, we're not even alone, because there is no person to be alone. It's more a quality of this field.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I.
But the thing is that as confused human beings, we're constantly searching for company, for reification, for, what's the word? Something that proves that I'm here. That's an aspect of confusion. And we're afraid of being alone, loneliness. The funny thing is, though, that we can all, in varying degrees, work with it and accept it. So, for instance, there are people in this room today who've gone off on retreats, solitary retreat. And maybe you feel anxious as you go in, because you're going to be alone, completely alone for some period of time that you've designated, a week, 2 weeks, a month. A long retreat is 3 years, 3 months, 3 days. But you make that commitment and you give up at some point the desire, the constant complaint, and the wish that you had company. Thanks.
Fred and Dan Epstein both have virtual hands up.
And I think Meg did too, didn't you, Meg? Okay. Well, let's pick somebody.
Hello,
Hello.
lady first.
Who first?
Meg.
Okay,
Lady.
Meg.
My question is about projection, and I'm not sure where it fits into these chapters, but I have a problem with projection, and one of the problems is when I project onto someone that what they're thinking, sometimes I'm right, like maybe 50% of the time, and so I never know if my projection is correct or not, and it really causes a lot of confusion and pain.
And what is the question, if there is one?
Well, I don't know if I have a specific question, except how it fits into this whole, the reading that we've done and what you're talking about now, how to combat it basically, and how to get around it and deal with it within the practice.
So there's a difference between projection and sensitive apprehension, or sensitive, what's the word, awareness of the person or the situation. And with projection, the idea is that we're taking something from the past and placing it on top of this experience that's happening in the future, in the present, in order to come up with some prescription on how to behave in a way that's safe or beneficial for me. This is the idea of projection. As opposed to, you might open your mind and really listen to what's taking place across from you. This is actually a skill that's taught to psychotherapists, coaches, how to listen properly in order to be able to respond more accurately to that individual. Because oftentimes we're just sort of lost in our thoughts, and it makes us less intelligent, less sensitive. But if you come present, meditation, and you actually open your mind to that person who's sitting across from you, you become much more aware of facial gestures, what's going on in their eyes, the way they comport their body, and things come that are maybe information, as it were. It's not like it's a message, but it makes you much more accurately responsive. Projection is a form of self-protection, I think, is what we're talking about here. And that makes you less intelligent on the whole, because we tend to come up with cliched interpretations, things that we've thought before. And Laura, do you have anything?
I was going to say I'm a projector too. And the fact that you said you project, that's a habitual pattern, it seems like that I anyway can work with that. Like I'm dissatisfied with what somebody's doing, or suspicious. You didn't necessarily say negative kind of projections. And so I can kind of just have that as an open question, am I feeling that way? And feel into that. And then there's my truth or not, in terms of the confusion. or even just if it's happening in conversation, owning it, like I'm getting a sense of sadness here. Maybe that's just me, that there's a, like we said, in absolute view, there isn't a distinct you and me, right? So maybe projection is a little too worried about placing things in the other or self. That's all I got.
Fred, you had something?
Yes, and I'm so happy Meg went first, because I had a question about something that popped out of me in the chapter about taming neurotic heat. And with Meg's question, I started to see that so much of projection is tied up into this. Where it's like a situation gets so intense and I'm not noticing my own feelings in my body, and I get completely lost. Like, and I had an incident last Friday where I actually screamed at a waiter and banged on a table because I just lost my cool, and I'm like, wow. And it was like a real practical exercise in compassion for myself, and had to be aware of this situation. And I guess my question is, how do I be less dramatic with this taming of this neurotic heat?
Neurotic heat?
Heat. Like, I think that's what they say in the chapter of it's chapter 18, where they talk about taming the neurotic.
Yeah, discipline is as taming the neurotic heat. That's his definition of discipline. It was in reference.
Yep, there you go.
Okay.
And I'm like, and then I catch myself like in this like spiral pattern of like, oh, I wasn't disciplined there. I'm bad. I'm evil. And I was like paralyzed for a few hours over this situation.
Laura, do you want to address it? Or?
I'm noticing that for me, with time, I'm less reactive. So I'm catching whatever it is quicker. And so it hasn't gotten so big yet. So whatever triggered you in that situation, maybe your reactivity was really quick and you're all, maybe it took you shock, or maybe there was a slower buildup that you weren't noticing, being in the present moment. But certainly it sounds like you're giving yourself a hard time, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm making it a lot worse. It's like the inch out of the mile. Like I see myself caught in it. And I'm like, okay, I'm not in it now, but I know that it's a possibility.
Yeah, because you're human.
Yeah.
So the practice is, it's all spelled out. To be aware and to be compassionate. In other words, to see what's going on, and you've done that, and to be compassionate about it, which will make you see it more clearly. Because right now, or the way you're describing it, your seeing is very clouded by your judgment, your self-judgment. Which is a form of self-attack. And so to relax that as much as you can, that's the practice. And maybe you can't, do it fully, but little by little we practice. That's why we call it practice. And it's a practice of developing clear seeing about what's going on and compassion. The two go together. They enable each other. That compassion, that kindness that allows you to stop reverberating. We all have this. This is what's called cutting the karmic chain. And as long as we try to perfect ourselves, we're not cutting the karmic chain at all.
John, could we also say with the very fact that he recognized what he did and the very fact that he's had the courage to speak in front of this group constitutes a gap. All of this is a gap. And so progress.
Well said. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
So I see we've got a couple of people with Dan. You had your hand raised.
Yes, thanks. You know, I had a similar comment and I guess comment question to Randy's. I think it was Randy who brought up loneliness. It seemed to me, I want to know if this was a correct reading, that the distinction isn't between aloneness and loneliness, but the distinction is between aloneness and loneliness with the awareness of the need for company and companionship, and loneliness and aloneness with, you know, just with the unconscious or whatever you want to call it, need for companionship. You know, you can have aloneness and loneliness without the need for companionship, which is what he says we're trying to aim for, giving up the need for companionship. And you can have aloneness and loneliness that's very attached to that need for companionship. Is that a correct reading of?
Works. It works for me. What do other people think? Laura, Tully, I see you there.
For
Well-
me, it feels a little different. It feels like loneliness is about everything that you said is loneliness. It's like either craving the other or renunciating the other, but there's an other. And for me, aloneness feels more like something like spaciousness, that there's no problem there. But that's does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense too. Also, I mean, it all makes sense. It all doesn't make sense. Not to get too and the other thing I just want to say quickly, Meg was bringing up projection. You know, I don't know if this is helpful or not helpful to anyone, but in psychoanalytic thinking, the concept is about transference, you know, and transference is just the projection. And the object in you know, in traditional Western psychoanalytic psychotherapy is resolution of the transference, just like would be cutting through the karmic, whatever you want to call it. So, you know, projection, you can be aware of the projection, or you can be in transference where you're not aware that you even may be projecting.
So that points to clear seeing, right?
Except from Freud's point of view, clear seeing. So it's really just his projection. Anyway, that's it. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Who else had their hand up?
Valerie had her hand up.
Oh, Valerie, and then Peter.
Mark, maybe? No.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, two things occurred to me. Having compassion for oneself is a challenge when an incident that it feels like, oh, geez, I really screwed that up. Said something, did something, and the more time that I take in meditation, in any spiritual practice that brings me back to the present, the more I have delays in a good way, the pause. And not only do I first look at, can I have compassion, be kind, gentle to myself, but can I also be compassionate, kind, make an amends to a person, an entity, an animal that I might have harmed, that I might have upset, some homeostasis outside. How, then I have to think about my intention and still say, that's not pitying, that's not sympathy, that's just owning it.
Thank you.
Peter, did you have something?
Well, yeah, thank you. Um, I'm a little shy about sharing this, and please tell me if I, don't have it or I'm deluding myself. But I wanted to share something very positive of my experience. I'm not going to go through the process of getting there, except saying I started being terrified. And couldn't stand to be alone, and so on and so on and so on. But anyway, the point that I want to add is that there was, and I think it just comes from practice, that wonder that you had mentioned, which has stuck with me, that we don't have to be, going to therapy or reading a book or any of those things. With practice, it can come. And in that respect, I found myself alone after who was taking care of me, very dear to me, went away for over a month. And initially, I was thinking, oh, I have to get somebody to be around and all of these things and so on. But I had this experience that first of all, I didn't wound up not wanting anybody. They were more an obligation than anything. And then I started to experience some words which I feel can go along with loneliness. And those words are independence and freedom, actually, because that state can free one from dependence. I have to do this and that and so, and it's been incredibly freeing for me. And I can say I don't think it's the first time in my life that I'm feeling this way, this independence, and I think that's, at least for me, has been an experience. And I don't think that I'm fooling myself, but anybody's welcome to say that they feel from what I'm saying that I am. But my experience is my experience, and my practice is my practice. And I didn't do anything. It was a discovery, and it was a glorious and joyful discovery. Not, oh, I've managed, I've managed. No, it wasn't the defeat of anything, not anything of the kind, but actual joy, joy, quiet joy, quiet joy. And I just wanted to share that with everybody, that there is that kind of, I certainly hope I'm not the only one, that kind of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Thank you.
It is past 9 o'clock now. I don't know how much further you want to go.
I think we've got one other person. That's Mark.
Oh.
We can end.
Hi, thank you. I didn't think I was going to get in tonight. Anyway, I've been waving. I think my hand gets disappears with my my sheet. So the elephant. Anyway, well, I think for me, aloneness is integral with my meditation. And I think for me, for me, it's like loneliness is part of my samsaric world, but aloneness is the spatial aspect of my meditation. And it's fine. It's beautiful. It's a great place to be. And there's no need there. But the loneliness, yeah, I feel that, you know, I'm, you know, wishing and wanting and hoping maybe I can meet this person or that person or whatever. But that's not part of, to me, of the meditation practice. That's separate for me. But not to say that I'm feeling lonely per se in every part of aspect of the world when I'm not sitting on the pillow. But so I understand what people are talking about. They don't, you know, an independence from feeling like you have to be attached at the hip from, you know, every person or whatever. Anyway, the other thing I just wanted to mention was the crankiness in chapter 18, talking about being cranky. I mean, that was very liberating, I felt, as far as, yes, you could be angry. And it's okay to be angry. But in time, like Laura was saying, with meditation, that will resolve over time. And that's exactly what it says in the book on chapter 18, that the crankiness, don't beat yourself up for it. There's nothing wrong with it. And over time, it will resolve with meditation. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you. Well, everybody, we've gone over. Let's end with the dedication of merit. And is there anything else to say, Laura or Barry? No?
Oh, Sadhana Mahamudra.
Yeah, I mentioned that's going to take place next Monday. We'll start it probably at 6:30 with meditation, and then we'll start the sadhana at 7. And there'll be emails about it too. Okay. So. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. I think these chants are all about what we've been talking about tonight. Profound, brilliant glory. Dark ignorance of sentient beings. So good night, everybody. Thank you.
night.
Wonderful to see you all.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Good all.
Thank you so much.
Good night,
Hasta la
everybody.
vista.
Hasta la
Good
vista.
Mind the gap.
Night all.
That's good.
That's a good one.
Or fall
That's a good
into the gap.
Or welcome to the gap.
That's good. That's good. Thank you.
Oh,
Bye.
Mind the gap. That means all over England, there are constant reminders, right?
Bye. I fake sneezed. No gap. Take care.
Lovely to see everybody. Okay, I'm going to close down the meeting. Saeed, it's good to see you.
Good night. Have a good night.
Have a good night. Bye, Ed, too.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for coming so early in the morning, Saeed.
My commitment to this Sangha is from my heart.
Wonderful.
Yes.
We're
Thank
so,
you.
so glad you're here.
Have a good night. Have a good night.
You too.